Hi everyone, welcome to Serendipity Soap Company. My name's Sarah and today I'm going to be making the fairy door soap. I just love the way this soap turned out. These soaps are so cute and each bar is slightly unique and they just remind me of being out in the woods in Maine. So I'm starting out my soap with my melted hard oils and my liquid oils in my big container and my lye water solution in my small container, and they are both at just under 100 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and add my lye water solution into my oils. And I'm going to bring those to emulsification with my spatula. My soap comes to emulsification pretty quickly. So I'm going to add my essential oil blend, which is tea tree, orange, lavender, eucalyptus, fir and patchouli. And this smells amazing. It's like a damp, woodsy smell with a little hint of something magical. Now I'm going to split my soap between my two containers with 1/3 in one container and 2/3 in the other container. I'm going to be working with the container with the 1/3 in first. And this is going to be for my fairy door, for my sculpted layer. So I'm adding some cocoa powder to this to make a nice deep brown colour. And I'm mixing it up with my spatula. Now I do want this part to thicken pretty quickly. This soap is going to be sculpted, so it needs to be thick and be able to hold its own weight. So I'm going to stick blend this for quite a while so it comes to thick trace. And here you can see it is getting thicker. So I'm going to keep stirring it, keep stick blending it, and I'm going to let it sit until it can hold its own shape. I've cut myself a sculpting tool out of some thin plastic mat, and I'm going to go ahead and add my soap batter into the middle of my mold and start building that up so that it makes it easier for me to sculpt. Now my plastic scraper was actually too thin, so I used it as a template and cut out a slightly more robust scraper out of an end piece of soap. That's holding up pretty well. So I'm just bringing my scraping tool back and forward along the length of the mold, and that's pushing my soap up towards the middle, but it's struggling to bring it all the way up, so I'm using the back of my spoon to bring the soap up to the peak of the door arch. You can see that my soap is setting up nicely. So now that the soap is in a peak in the middle, I'm going to come back in with my scraping bar and form the sides of my fairy door. Now I'm moving back to my main part of my batter, and it is still very fluid. So I'm adding some kaolin clay and just a touch of activated charcoal. I live in southern Maine and we have a lot of silver birch trees around us, so that's what my fairy door is going to be based on. It's going to provide a nice contrast between the dark fairy door and the light tree. So this is going to be a nice silvery grey colour. So I'm going to blend this up to trace. And I'm bringing my mold back and pouring my soap down using the fairy door to break the fall. Now I am adding a little bit before I add some activated charcoal to form a pencil line, and that's going to form the horizontal lines of the tree. I'm using my spatula here to break the fall of the soap so it doesn't puncture the pencil line too much, but this is a tree, so I don't mind if it breaks it up a little bit. And actually the fairy door itself did a pretty good job of breaking the fall of the soap. So I'm coming back in with some more activated charcoal, and you can see I'm not trying to cover my soap by any means. I want to leave this as irregular as I can. And I'm just going to repeat this process until my soap covers the top of the fairy door. Now I'm going to add some more activated charcoal, and I'm going to try and keep that to the middle of my soap. I'm not trying to cover the whole of the top of the soap. And now I'm going to add a layer of green, which is going to look like a nice piece of moss above the fairy's door. And this green has been coloured with spirulina. And with that in my soap, I'm going to go ahead and fill up the rest of my mould with my silver grey colour. Now I'm going to be putting some mushroom embeds on the top of this soap. So I made these 24 hours before I made my soap, and I got a piece of red soap dough. I formed it into a ball, flattened out one side using my finger, smoothed out any cracks that I had, and using a fondant ball tool, I just formed the cap of the mushroom and used my fingers to find a shape that I liked for my mushrooms. And I repeated that process with all of the caps. Now the next stage was to get this mushroom brown colour with some brown and some white soap dough, and I formed them into an elongated teardrop shape. And again I formed enough for all of my mushrooms. And then I attached them to the caps using some spring water and a paintbrush. I placed the thin end into the mushroom cap, and I used this cuticle pushing tool to spread the mushroom stem out and adhere it to the mushroom cap. This cuticle tool is just for soap dough purposes. All of my soap dough tools are exclusively for soap making purposes. And I repeated the same process with each of my mushrooms until I had enough to cover the top of my soap. They do stand up nicely on my counter. Alright, so about an hour after I made my soap, it had firmed up enough that it would support the weight of the mushrooms. So I've piped on some of the moss soap so that each little mushroom will sit in a piece of moss. And I'm going to go ahead and add one of my large mushrooms to each of my bars of soap, and I'm poking the mushroom base all the way through the moss and into the soap, so it will be very sturdy. Now each bar of soap is going to have 2 mushrooms, so I'm adding another little section of moss for my second mushroom to sit on each bar. And just look how cute those little mushrooms are. They're going to sit on this soap, nestled right in next to the big mushrooms, and each one is going to have a second mushroom. So I waited 24 hours and came back the next day to cut my soap. Now I lined my soap up with my multi-bar cutter to make sure that none of the mushrooms were cut during the cutting of my soap. And this is what it looks like. You've got the little fairy door in the middle and the black horizontal lines of the birch tree and a nice section of moss above the door. And each little fairy door is slightly different. They're all individual and unique, just like the fairies that live in them. So the first step to finishing up these is texturing the door and making the door surrounds. So I'm using a bamboo skewer to create wiggly lines on the dark brown part of this soap to create the texture of tree bark, and in a few places I'm just adding a little round circle to look like tree knots. Now I'm creating the door surround with some more soap dough, and I'm using dark brown, light brown and some white, which I've just marbled together, and I'm rolling them out into a stick. And I'm bending that around the door, and each door is uniquely shaped, and then I'm trimming the ends. And I'm going to go ahead and stick my door surrounds onto my soap using some soap frosting. And this is the soap frosting I'll be using later. It's been coloured with spirulina. And I just move the door surround on each door and use the soap frosting to adhere them, and repeat that process for all the soaps. And all of the door surrounds came out slightly different, and I honestly couldn't tell you which one is my favourite. I love them all for different reasons. Alright, moving on to the next stage, piping the leaves on these soaps using a Wilton 66 leaf tip. And I have switched on to piping bags because I remembered where I put them, and it's easier to pipe with piping bags because they're not as stretchy. So I'm starting out by putting a few leaves at the base of each of the doors and in various spaces around the door. There's no real reason for where they go, just whatever looks good to me at the time. And I did figure by the last soap that I did that I preferred a more full looking door, so I went ahead and added a few more leaves before piping some more leaves onto the top of each bar, surrounding the mushrooms. piping some small flowers on my soap using a Wilton 18 tip, and the soap's been coloured with turmeric to give it a nice golden orange yellow colour. And each soap is going to have a flower on the free end of the bar and between the two mushrooms. Moving on to piping my large flowers, and I'm using a Wilton 21 tip for this. These flowers are a nice deep pink colour, and these have been coloured with rose kaolin clay, and each bar will have one flower next to the small flower on the free end. And finally I'm piping flowers on the front of the soap. As you can see, I've already piped the large flowers on this soap, and now I'm adding the smaller flowers just surrounding the door, filling in any gaps, and at times I'll put them on the tree itself. My inspiration for this soap came when I was about 16 weeks pregnant, and I was convinced that I was going to have a boy. But I was sitting in the woods one day, and the thought occurred to me that if I had a girl, I could make fairy doors with her. And I was so excited that I could make fairy doors. And 4 weeks later, in my ultrasound, I found out I was having a girl. And she is 1 year old at the moment, and I can't wait to make fairy doors with her this summer. Alright, that's it. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Leave any questions or comments in the comments section below. And for more soap making videos, please subscribe to my channel.